Hi, and welcome to an Our Favorite Movies edition of Filmography Club. I'm Jason Caviness. When we started this show, the idea was to look at the work of one particular filmmaker per season and to talk to folks who know their movies. This remains unchanged, but obviously 2020 continues to be a chaotic year, so adjustments have to be made. I originally intended to create a parallel series where we could occasionally step outside of the confines of the work of that particular season's subject and focus on other movies. Now, the guests don't need to be quote-unquote movie people. They could be anyone because everybody has a favorite movie. So for now, let's step away from our usual format and mix things up a little bit. My guest today is Ted Ringeisen, a Los Angeles-based filmmaker and cinematographer. We're old buddies, and we keep in touch primarily through text, so it was nice to actually sit down with him and have a conversation. As you've no doubt noticed, the audio quality is different from what it usually is. That's because the quarantine has prevented us from using the studio, so I'm doing this at home. I'm doing the best I can here, folks, and me and my guest today, we have to speak via Zoom. So while the audio quality isn't exactly the best, it's what we've got. We're doing our best. All right, so today we're talking about Jaws. I reached out to my buddy Ted. Hey, Ted, good to see you, man.
Jason, good to see you too.
So if you had to pick a favorite movie, you're going with Jaws?
Gun to my head, if anyone's like, because obviously whenever I talk to anybody, I'm constantly talking about movies. And not constantly, but you get it. But anyone's like, what's your favorite movie? I'm always like, Jaws. And I feel like that's probably the answer for a lot of people who are into movies. Not just because it's an easy choice, but when you watch the movie, you find out why that's so many people's favorite movie.
When you told me your favorite movie was Jaws, I thought perfect. And I haven't watched it it's been decades. I haven't seen this movie in over decades. It's so a part of our shared culture. It's so ingrained. I mean, I believe it's kind of considered to be the first blockbuster.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, it changed the game.
Star Wars, I think it was the highest grossing film.
It was the highest grossing movie of all time. I've got the numbers right here in front of me. The movie cost $9 million to make, and the box office, it raked in $470.7 million.
Oh, my God. Wow.
Yeah. Well,
this is on a $9 million budget.
Sure. And it's Spielberg is Spielberg for a reason, and this is a big part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then he followed it up with Close Encounters, I think. A great actor.
Close Encounters. He almost, I read today, just on the Wikipedia page, that Jaws 2, of course, diminishing returns on these Jaws movies.
Right.
They fired the first director just a week or two into shooting, and they came this close to getting Spielberg back, but he was already wrapped up in Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
I just watched the fourth one last night with my roommate. We watched it with I don't know if you listened to the Film Crypt. It's the two directors. It's the one director from like the Hatchet series and another guy that did like Everly and Mayhem. I can't remember their names, but they're buddies. And they did a commentary track, kind of like what Red Letter Media does with movies.
Right.
And they did it on Jaws the Revenge. So we watched Jaws the Revenge. And that's a movie I remember watching. I watched all of the Jaws a lot when I was a kid. Like I love the first one. I remember liking the second one, but it's essentially just like a slasher movie with the shark and like the teenage kids on the boats. Like it's not bad. I remember there's like pretty good performances in there, but they're all so boring. Like Jaws of Revenge. I mean, we're watching it with the commentary track, so we don't have any sound on the TV. I don't know how the fuck I paid attention. And that movie kept me engaged when I was 10 because it is so boring. I mean, the shark is in it like 5 times. And it's not like in the first movie. Like you only see the shark a few times, but it's always like a threat, because of the barrels. But Jaws of Revenge, it's like watching a Lifetime Movie Network movie where it's like family drama. And it's just, I don't know. There's interesting facts about that. Like from start to finish, the movie took 9 months and it started shooting without a completed script and they had a release date. So the fact that movie even got made as competently as it is, even though there's some weird editing and horrible other shit as well. But like the fact that movie got made without a script from conception to release date in 9 months is kind of impressive. But the movie speaks for itself, I suppose. And there's actually some nice camera work in a couple of scenes. I was like, oh, wow, that doesn't look too bad.
I mean, it is impressive that 9 months after them just putting pen to paper or even starting it, the thing was in theaters. That is impressive, but this is a movie that's widely considered to be among the worst films
it's
ever
not
made.
good, but I have definitely seen movies that I would say are way worse. I mean, and that did well, you know, and you're like, ooh, really?
Or rather a wide release movie, one of the worst wide releases of all time.
I would say so, yeah. I'm not defending Jaws the Revenge.
So I'm so glad that you mentioned Jaws, because again, I hadn't seen the movie in decades, so I got to watch it with pretty much fresh eyes. I mean, there's plenty of quotes, there's all sorts of stuff and images from the film that have just kind of made their way into our cultural DNA.
Mm-hmm.
So of course I'm familiar with all of that, but it was great to just sit down and watch the whole thing for the first time since I've been an adult.
Wow.
A fantastic movie.
It really is.
Great movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a reason it made that much money. And watching some of the behind the scenes stuff, it looked so difficult to make.
Yeah.
Just to go out there on oh my God, just Spielberg out on these boats with the crew. And he's talking about how difficult it is because you get your shot framed up. And then by the time everything's in place and you're ready to roll, the boats have drifted apart or closer together. And so
the tide
right.
was taken.
So the whole shoot had to be very loose, just kind of like, don't get married to that idea of that one shot being framed up exactly that way. Let's just kind of do it on the fly. Right. Let's just make it look as good as we can on the fly.
Yeah. I think even what's the DP's name on that, I think is Bill Butler.
It's Bill Butler.
I could be wrong, but because Spielberg wanted to, and, you know, especially in like his earlier movies, you can notice that he does a lot of those like dolly in, dolly out, and those what do they call them? Like the Spielberg oneers, where it'll start in one setup and then he'll follow a character and then it'll be a completely different setup. And I remember reading, or maybe it might have been like on a DVD extra or something. I would say commentary, but I don't think Spielberg does.
Yeah, there's not one for Jaws.
Movies. I think I remember reading somewhere that he said that he wants the movies to kind of stand on their own merit, and that by him breaking it down and talking to them, it sort of ruins the mystique of them. Okay. Which, I mean, that sounds cool. But yeah, so he had to, because he had all these ideas, especially shooting on the boat, of how he wanted to sort of like set up dolly tracks and do all these like elaborate sort of one takes, which there are quite a bit in the movie, but there's not necessarily a lot of movement. But then he had to just adapt. Like I think Bill Butler just built this like wooden rig around the camera to where it was heavier, so it wouldn't look very handheld. They could move the camera freely and then just like burn through setups because they weren't getting any. Like I think they were just like constantly trying to figure out like what else they could shoot because everything was always
the most
wrong.
Spielbergian stuff I saw in the movie, as far as like shots go, all the stuff on land, the stuff with them in the family in the house talking, or just out on the beach or in the streets with the mayor. There were lots of those oneers that his oneers aren't like PTAs. They don't tend to be really show offy. They don't go on for like 6 minutes at a time. They tend to be a minute and a half. And he sets up what would be another director would use 2 or 3 different shots with blocking. He just puts that all into one take, and it's immersive.
And I think the longest one, I could be wrong, but like there's the one on the boat platform when Chief Brody is taking it over to the Boy Scouts or the lifeguard scouts or whatever that are swimming in the water. That's all pretty much one take. I think there's one cut there when he says like, "You yell barracuda," everybody says, "Huh? What?" You know, like that. Like that's all one take. And then when Cooper is explaining to Mayor Vaughn the size of the tooth that he pulled out of the boat, and then there's that vandalized billboard with the girls screaming, like that's all one take. And I think there's one cut. It's like the reverse angle of Mayor Vaughn getting into his car and driving away. So that's like, it's like 2 setups. But really like the one take, it's like 4 different setups. Like the camera like booms up and booms down and dollies right or something like that, and then comes down to like a low angle. And it's great because the performance, that's the other thing too, is like all the acting in this movie is, everybody's good in it. All the locals that you can tell were probably really just there on Martha's Vineyard. Like they're all just funny. It's great. Quint is definitely probably my favorite movie character of all time, besides like Ripley and like Dr. Schultz from Django Unchained. Like Quint is just like, it's just like one of those movie characters, and the performance by Robert Shaw too is you cannot take your eyes off.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Quint, I was about to bring him up too, because when you said that all the acting just felt really natural, he's the one character in that movie that could have become a cartoon character. He's so close to being a salty old pirate, but he does still feel grounded. He still feels real.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting too, because I remember reading, I think this would have been really good. I mean, I'm glad we got what we got, but Lee Marvin was originally going to be, Spielberg was interested in Lee Marvin playing Quint. And I'm like, wow, that would have been kind of interesting, actually. And then I think he also wanted, who was it in Moby Dick? Gregory Peck.
Oh, wow.
I think he wanted Gregory Peck as, because in the book, I believe that Quint dies very Ahab-like, tangled up in the ropes of the barrels on the shark and drowns, much like Ahab does. Like, I think he gets trapped to the side of Moby Dick. But I mean, I'm glad we got Robert Shaw because he is Quint, you know. He's just incredible in it.
Fantastic performances all the way through. Even the little kids.
Yeah, the kids are great.
So this was the #1 top grossing film of all time from 1975 for a couple of years. Then we get into Star Wars territory. High concept, kind of cheap to make, and then you put it out right at the beginning of summer and dump tons of money into advertising on TV. The merchandising for this thing was crazy. I remember as a little kid, Jaws is older than I am, but just barely. So I grew up in that cultural wake, pardon that pun, of this movie. And I remember just growing up seeing like stickers on stuff and lunch boxes and shit. This is a movie about a man-eating shark, for God's sakes. Yeah. And they marketed it like it was Star Wars.
It's also kind of like a pirate movie too.
Yeah, pirate movie, sort of a slasher, maybe not as much like you mentioned as part 2.
It's like an intelligently, it's funny because it is a slasher movie and it's like the man versus nature thing. And I mean, just rewatching it, it's funny because you said you hadn't watched it in decades. It's probably like a once a year movie for me. Not 2 days before you had mentioned it, I had watched it like 3 times in 1 week because it was like, it came up to be time. It was like, oh, this is the once a year that I'm going to watch this movie. And then I watched it and then my roommate came home and he was like, oh, I haven't seen this in forever. And I was like pretty much towards the end of the movie. And then the next day I came home and he was watching it. So of course I just sat down and just like watched it. And then a friend of mine had never seen it before. And I was like, you got it. I was like, wow, dude, like you've never seen Jaws before? I was like, okay, well, we got it. And he had a big projector and I was like, we have to watch it. And he loved it. But he was just talking. He's like, it's so straightforward. And it's like, yeah, like there's no like, it's not convoluted at all. And
very tight script.
Everybody had the arc. Yeah, it's just such a tight, like the pacing of it is just, it's so good. And it's one of those movies that it's like, it all starts on land and then they have to start hunting the shark. And then the movie like starts again when they're on the water. Oh my God. Yeah. Like all that stuff was so good. And now it's getting even better. You know, like it's so rare that movies get better in the third act. And Jaws just like continues to get better as the movie goes on, like especially when it's Brody, Hooper, and Quint just all in that.
I love that dynamic.
I mean, it really is. Like they all just have like great chemistry, and it's funny. Like there's a lot of comedy mixed in there too. It's just so.
I was surprised at how much I laughed at the movie, which is baffling because the one movie I can think of that Spielberg directed that's just on its face a comedy is widely regarded as one of his it's one of his biggest failures. 1941.
Yeah, 1941.
I watched it a while. I got that Steven Spielberg box that came out. It had like 6 or 7 movies in it, and it's got half of it are his just slam dunks from early in his career, Jaws, E.T., that sort of stuff. And then the other half is the shit that they just couldn't sell individual Blu-rays for, like 1941, Always. Oh my God, that's his worst movie.
Let's talk about his better movie.
So the score, 2 notes.
Yeah.
2 notes, John Williams. And
it's
iconic.
Universal. You know?
Wonderful.
It really is.
Yeah.
There's just some great cues too. Like the one shot of, I guess it's like really when you see how big the first time and it kind of like bumps under the orca, the boat that they're on. And it's just this like overhead, the cameraman is probably in like the crow's nest of the boat. And it's just like all those like harps start playing and it just kind of really emphasizes the size and the majesty of the shark that they're hunting. It's so good. And then he kind of has those like pirate shanty themes.
The
like
Spanish ladies.
Farewell and Adieu plays over and over again. Yeah, like it's you know, what more can you say about John Williams? He's just such a master of just like knowing when placing music in such appropriate places. When the kids prank all the swimmers and everything with the cardboard fin, there's no music. So then you're like, oh, like, is that the shark, isn't it? And then later on when the shark is on the pond and it attacks Michael, then the music starts to kick in to like cue the audience.
Yeah, here's the real thing.
Here's the threat.
And it's certainly one of necessity, I guess, to just like Ridley Scott's Alien, not show the creature. But the limitations...
Which is a shame because with all the advancements in animatronics and stuff, I mean, like even in Deep Blue Sea, the CGI in that movie is horrible, but like there's a couple of like animatronic sharks. You're like, oh, I mean, like that doesn't look too bad, you know, like that could... I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's a movie that needs to be remade because what more can you do with it that wasn't already done perfectly the first time? And that's the other thing about the movie too, like other than like people smoking in hospitals, it still feels contemporary. It doesn't feel, it's timeless. Even if you had all the advancement with like cell phones and stuff, like that would be the only other thing that people would be doing in that movie that they're not already doing in it. It would be like recording things on their phone. Because like what could you do against a shark with a cell phone, you know?
Right.
Like when they're out on the boat there, you know, like they don't need cell phones. Like they would have to.
Yeah, it wouldn't change the story in the least bit. Watching it.
Yeah, except one of them would be filming.
Sure. Yeah, there would be a lot of people off to the side watching, you know, filming people getting eaten. Yeah. Watching the movie, I was amazed at how timeless it is, the story. Because again, the technology wouldn't change much of anything, but also timely in a way. And it's totally unintentional, of course. But you've got the idiot mayor saying, no, it's fine. Get out there. Go. Everything. Completely ignoring what the experts are saying.
But yeah, I mean, that's the other thing too. Yes, the shark does look fake, but it's one of those things. It's like you can excuse nowadays if you're completely engrossed in the movie, you can sort of excuse like shitty CGI, you know. And with Jaws, a couple of times, I think the shark genuinely looks terrifying. Like the shot that's scariest to me is when the boys are in the pond and the shark bumps that one guy's boat that's like, you boys okay over there? And then it bumps his boat. And he's trying, it's like that overhead shot, and he's trying to get back onto the boat. And just under the surface, you see the shark come up and like grab his leg and yank him down. Like that doesn't look fake. I mean, you know that it's fake, but it is so horrifying. The way it's just under the water, just enough to where you can kind of make it out. Oh my God. I mean, the opening scene is really scary too, because you can't see it, but just getting a glimpse of it. And it's like, oh God, every time that shot happens, I'm like, ugh, because I mean, being in the ocean, stranded in the middle of the ocean and eaten by a shark is 100% my worst fear. And it's probably due to Jaws. I mean, I was afraid to take a bath after that movie, honestly. There's a lot of great moments too that I think were just kind of caught, like the shooting stars. I know that those were just happened like on the day. Those weren't added in after the fact. It was the shot when they're all talking about the Indianapolis, which, God, that scene, that's probably one of my favorite scenes in movie history.
Yeah, that was wonderful.
I mean, it's just one guy talking for 4 minutes, however long that scene is. And it really does wrap up that story in just those 3 minutes. I mean, there's what's that podcast, Weird History or Hardcore History?
Dan Carlin.
Yeah. And he talks about, he did a whole podcast on the Indianapolis, and my God, I cannot think of a more nightmarish, hellish on earth situation than that. I mean, 4 nights, 5 days in the middle of the ocean. Oh my God. And it's such a perfect arc for Quint too, because he says in that scene, like, I'll never put on a life jacket again. And then he has that moment when the boat is sinking where he grabs the life jackets and you're like, uh-oh. But he only gives one to Hooper and Brody.
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes out the way that he thought he was going to when the boat went down. It's always cool when Quint goes. Like, you never want him to go, and then it happens. Well,
yeah, that movie, they were rewriting the script as they were shooting. The screenplay is credited to 2 people. It's Peter Benchley himself. This movie, of course, is based on his novel.
Yep.
And another guy who...
Carl Gottlieb, right?
Yep.
Who's actually he's in the movie. He's the news reporter. Hey guys, can we take a picture? Come on guys, take a picture for the paper. That's Carl Gottlieb. And then I think John Milius wrote the Indianapolis speech, which was then added to by Robert Shaw. And you can actually see in that scene, I was reading up on it, that Robert Shaw was so drunk because he was a pretty horrible drunk, I think, or pretty serious drunk. I don't know if he was horrible, but he, you can see he was so drunk the first night that they were trying to shoot that scene that he couldn't get through it. And then he begged, it was either later that night or the next day, he begged Spielberg to let him try it again. And you can see the 2 different nights. So, or at least from what I've observed, I'm like, oh, there he's drunk. Oh, he's not drunk there. So it's when the scene first starts, Robert Shaw's eyes are like completely glazed over and he looks like really sweaty, and they're him and Hooper are comparing the scars. And then Brody's like, what's that tattoo on your arm? And he's like, oh, that's the USS Indianapolis. There you can see, and it's in that setup. They cut to that setup again one other time during the speech, but there you can tell that Robert Shaw, or at least I think you can tell that Robert Shaw is like hammered drunk. Like he's getting the lines out, but you can see that it's like, ugh. And then it cuts to like a medium shot of him and he's a little less sweaty. His eyes aren't glazed over. And that's where like the meat of the story comes. And you're like, oh, that's the other take. And then he cuts back to that one sort of wider shot of him and Hooper at the table. I think it's the part when he's like, lost 100 men. I don't know how many sharks, maybe 1,000. And like that, you're like, oh, there he's drunk again. But the performance is good there, so why not use it, So, yeah, it's pretty interesting.
So yeah, this is Spielberg's, 3rd movie?
Yeah.
2nd theatrical release. I mean, Duel was a TV movie here. I think it got a theatrical release.
Yeah, they reshot
with a couple extra scenes in Europe.
And then Sugarland Express, which I've actually never seen all of, but I do remember liking it when I was a kid.
Yeah, I watched it about a year ago.
Is it good?
Yeah, it was fun. It's got all the Spielberg stuff, except for the white light spilling in from somewhere. He didn't pick that up until I think
Close Encounters.
Close Encounters, I think is. But then man, he always has that blinding white light spilling in through a door or a window or a portal or something.
Darius Kanji, or not Darius Kanji.
Kaminsky.
Janusz Kaminski. Janusz Kaminski. Yeah. So that's been his DP ever since Schindler's List. So they all have that very sort of like saturated or desaturated look with like heavy backlight. But yeah, with like E.T. and Close Encounters, like you can see that's sort of the 80s Spielberg aesthetic. But with Jaws, it's very like raw. Like he uses a lot of those wide angles. It doesn't have that sort of like Spielberg sort of like filter over it, like it's just kind of like very straightforward. And if you didn't know it was a Spielberg movie, you wouldn't go into it being like, oh, this looks like a Spielberg movie. It just looks like a movie from the 70s, really. Yeah,
but if you're looking for it though, some of those early hallmarks are still there in this movie. Yeah. Like we said, the long tracking shots or the oneers with like 3 or 4 different blocking setups in it.
And the scene when Quint is just sitting in that chair, it's great editing and great tension building. Brody's trying to tie that knot, and then the fishing line starts to get clicked, and then Quint starts to buckle himself in, and it takes so long. Like, it always reminds me of the shot in Jurassic Park when Muldoon sees the raptor and then he starts unloading the gun, flicking it in.
The clever girl moment.
Like, it takes and he just knows how to milk those moments of, and then clever girl happens. And it's like those two scenes I always wondered if he had that in his mind when he was doing that, because it just takes its time to like, and every camera move just follows like one thing, and it's so good. And then right when Quint gets strapped in, that's when Brody ties the knot, and then the line gets yanked. Like, it's just brilliant. It's just such good filmmaking, good story. Like, you don't need the sound on to know exactly what the hell's happened.
However, you want the sound on because that score, those two notes. I think I was touching on this a little bit earlier. I want to go into it a little bit more here. The score does a wonderful job of letting us know when that shark is actually there. The limitations of the time really didn't allow for us to see the shark that much, which I'm glad of.
Yeah.
The shark, it kind of looks fakey. It looks fake, but it's not garbage. But you have to come up with clever ways to let us know that the shark is there lurking. And one is that great score by John Williams. I thought another wonderful choice was the barrels.
The barrels, yeah.
I assume that that's an actual thing that people use.
Jaws
makes
is the
sense.
Only thing, and it makes so much sense. But Jaws is really the only thing that, and I don't know much about shark hunting or whale hunting or anything like that, but would imagine that would be the method that you would use to, to track and also exhaust whatever animal it is you're trying to hunt.
Right. And I got the impression that it would take an animal of extraordinary strength to submerge even one of those barrels.
And that's the other thing too. Like, the more barrels they get on it, it's also like a source of information to the audience, because Quint keeps saying it can't go down with 3 barrels. And then it does, and you're like, man, what are they up against? Like, so it's just constantly mounting the tension. And it's also, I think, the shark, even though it does look fake, it's convincing because the editing, like, they never choose to show too much of it. And that, I think, is the problem with the other movies, is that if they had just cut a frame later or a frame earlier, the shark would be more convincing. But obviously you have to up the ante with the sequels, and I understand that. But the benefit that the editing lends to the first movie, I mean, it's just cutting to like splashing and tails, and like the shark just comes up and then it cuts it. Like, it always knows when to cut. And I think Verna Fields was the editor on that. Yeah, I think Verna Fields, and she won an Academy Award for the editing, I believe. And I think it won 2. I think it won sound design and best editing.
All right, so here we go. Academy Awards for Jaws. We've got Best Film Editing, Verna Fields. Best Music, Original Dramatic Score, John Williams. Best Sound, Robert L. Hoyt, Roger, Heeman Jr., Earl Mattery Jr., and R. Carter. Maybe didn't quite sweep or anything, but
go see it if you haven't seen it. Like, rent it. I know that they're all on HBO Max right now. So if you haven't seen Jaws, and everybody's inside watching TV right now, so I mean, you might as well throw it on, because it's timeless. It's great. There's great characters. It's funny. It's scary.
Accidentally timely.
Yeah, it's timely. Yeah, give it a watch and just take it in, because it really is one of those, like, you should see it. It's just such a great movie.
All right, Ted. Thanks so much, man. It's been a blast.
Absolutely.
Maybe get you back for season 2.
I would be more than happy to hop back on the podcast for sure.
That sounds great, man.
Awesome.
Take care.
You too, man. Take care.
And that's it for this episode. I'd like to thank my guest, Ted Ringeisen. You can find Ted on Instagram at DinoBear2086. That's DINOBEAR2086. I'd also like to thank Michael Eads, Will Fox, and Ross Warner. Filmography Club is produced by the always hardworking folks that We Own This Town in beautiful Nashville, Tennessee. Thank you for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time.